and the USDA also, it's essentially the same process, are sort of passive bystanders to this, observing how this is moving forward and what it looks like is the implicated food. And at the end of that process, the Centers for Disease Control will likely say, we have a statistical degree of certainty that it's such and such a food that has caused this illness. And this could be as narrow as a specific brand of a product, or it could be as broad as a commodity. And we've seen many examples of commodities that have been implicated, and I think two that everyone will remember is spinach in 2006, where it was very unclear who was what brands were implicated. So the concern was it's spinach, but we don't know from whom or from where. And the other classic example was the tomatoes that subsequently turned out to be peppers, where there was very little insight as to where that had come from initially. The flip of that is when the epidemiology drives you to a specific brand, a specific product. So with those events having been the trigger, if it's a broad commodity thing, the FDA is going to be really putting out a wide swath, and they're going to be doing a traceback, and they want to know from the consumer who got sick. You start saying, you got sick? Where did you buy your tomatoes? Oh, well, I bought them from such and such a supermarket. Supermarket will get a visit from FDA, and their purpose is to discover where did you get your tomatoes from in this particular time frame. And that's really a discovery component. It's unlikely that the regulators will be thinking the supermarket was responsible for the problem, particularly obviously if it's a multi-state outbreak. So that then tracks back, well, the retailer got those tomatoes from a distributor. The FDA goes to the distributor, asks the same set of questions. And so it works back through a repacker and all the way down to a farm. And at each visit, the FDA is just simply seeking information about the product tracking. Where'd you get it from? What did you do with it? And who did you ship it to? At some point in all of that.
You had mentioned that, I'm going to break in here at this point, the term of linkage. Could you explore that? I think you're heading right toward it.
Well, exactly. The whole point of this exercise is to triangulate to one source that is considered probably to be the likely origin of the problem. Now, that may be a farm, it may be a processor, it could be a distributor, and it's about going down these separate tracks and finding, okay, there's a point of commonality, and at that point, the FDA's approach when the inspector shows up is not we just simply want to know how product tracked through you. It changes to, we think you are the source of the problem. And that is a very different visit. And if you are in the we think you're the source of the problem mode visit in an outbreak situation, then what you will find is that FDA inspectors will be showing up and really wanting to understand your process, your risks. They will likely arrive with significant amounts of sampling material. They will want to test finished product. They'll want to test product that's in the works. They'll want to potentially test ingredients. They will be wanting to swab your environment, your contact surfaces, your floors, your walls, your drains, and they will be looking for the microbe, whether it be Listeria or Salmonella or E. coli, that has been responsible for the outbreak. And, as often happens in situations like this, when they show up, they find it. And they link it back to, they say, okay, we've now found the source of this product. The main mission of FDA in this initial phase is to shut it down. They want to stop exposures. Then they want to figure out how it happened in the first place.
Dr. Acheson, I want to kind of break in here for a minute. And you had mentioned that every situation is different. And the question is, what is the standard of proof? And there have been several widely publicized cases where the actual producer that was zeroed in had negative test results, and yet they were still under an order. Can you identify that thinking for us?
Great question. And the standard of proof is, I honestly believe that there isn't a clear delineation of that. The one clarity to that is that if if a sealed product has tested positive for a pathogen, and that pathogen has been linked to an outbreak, that is a standard of proof that is hard to refute, assuming that the chain of custody and that the laboratory methods are robust. That is a pretty rock-solid standard. What more frequently happens is that it's the epidemiology. It's this process of what did you eat and where did you eat it, and doing the statistical analysis of that leads the regulator to then focus in on what we've just been discussing of getting in the plant. So in that situation, the standard of proof comes through statistics, and it comes by looking at the odds that the assumption is correct. I mean, it is an odds game, and it literally is called the odds ratio, where statistically, if it's evens, it's like, well, could be, maybe not. When you get an odds ratio of 1, it can go either way. When you get an odds ratio of 2, it's clearly tipping in favor of one way or the other. There's been situations I've been involved with. The classic one would be cookie dough that was linked to E. coli. No positive samples. It was purely epidemiology. Not that many people sick, even I think 20 or so. And the epidemiologist in Oregon was working that case, and he calculated an odds ratio there, and if my memory serves me correctly, it was 80, which is extremely high. And there you're saying, whoa, this is clear, but you don't have a positive. And the danger there is it right or is it wrong? It's statistical. The spinach situation, the epidemiology led us to believe it was spinach. They led CDC to believe it was spinach. Ultimately, spinach was found to be contaminated with the outbreak strain, bags of spinach. But it took a couple of weeks. Another great example would be back in 2007. There was the first really significant peanut butter recall was it was an outbreak of salmonella. The Centers for Disease Control had determined that it was a particular brand from a particular company, and it was statistics. It was purely statistics. And when the company was approached, they had exactly what you said. They had copious testing data that was negative, and through discussion with the company decided we're going to do a voluntary recall anyway. They looked at the data, they looked at the epidemiology, and said, we believe this, reluctantly perhaps, but we believe it. And then down the road, as consumers came forward with jars of peanut butter and also having had the same outbreak strain, and they said, well, yeah, I've got one of those jars at home. And they were sent into the lab, and they tested positive. So again, that was proof. And ultimately, the outbreak strain was found in the facility. So it all came together. So there is, it's a fantastic question. What is the standard of proof? And there are many who say the only standard we will accept is a positive out of our sample. And experience has taught me that more often than not, the epidemiology is right. Is it fallible? Yeah, it's fallible. And it is an odds ratio that you're looking at, and it's a statistical probability, which is never 100%.
Well, Dr. Acheson, we had chatted earlier about particular cases where the FDA was, in fact, negligent in their statistical gathering, and their analytical tests came up short, and yet they imposed a ban against a particular product coming into the United States. You're involved in one of them. Can you talk generally how that works and how a food producer can protect themselves or at least assert their rights?
Well, I think the most important aspect for a food producer is that you just never know when one of these things is going to be on your front doorstep. The notion that food producers will have some sense as to whether they are working with a higher risk versus a lower risk product, that's how does one define that? Products that have been repeatedly associated with problems, you know that it's hard to control the risk and so on and so forth. But we've seen many an example where a, quote, low-risk product has suddenly found itself in a bad place and linked to illness. So